Hello and welcome. You are listening to an informed take on current events brought to you by law students and staff of Queen's University Belfast. This is LawPod.
Hello, I'm Dr. Peter Doran. For this podcast, I'm delighted to say that we are joined by France's leading advocate for a recognition of the rights of nature. Valérie Cabanes is also closely involved in the international campaign for a recognition of the crime of ecocide. In a wide-ranging discussion, I was joined by my colleague Dr. Rachel Killean and by a number of guests online. We caught up with Valérie on her way to a special meeting of the Rights of Nature Tribunal, which took place alongside COP26 in Glasgow.
Yeah, I'm Valérie Cabanes. I'm a lawyer in international law and specifically on humanitarian law and human rights. It's interesting because this rights of nature movement is more and more linked with social justice and with the human rights movement. And for 20 years, I worked in a humanitarian mission around the world. I was with people, in poverty, child trafficking campaigns, and I worked also with Handicap International, like in Pakistan, Afghanistan, in Uganda, in Cambodia, and it happened in 2006 that I shifted and I started a PhD in legal anthropology, and I studied for 3 years. My field research was in Quebec, North Quebec, with the Innu people, who are native Indians. And when I was there, they were fighting against a huge hydroelectric dam that was planned to be built on their wild and ancestral river. And I realized at that moment how protecting their fundamental rights, and also as indigenous people, was totally linked of protecting the environment and their own ancestral lands. And I stopped this PhD because I was not neutral anymore. You know, when you're an anthropologist, you have to be neutral. And in fact, I became an activist on their side, along their side. And then I did the same kind of work following the project of building a huge dam in the Amazon, and I campaigned along Kasik Raoni, who is an indigenous leader from the Kayapo people, against the Belo Monte Dam. It was before Jair Bolsonaro. It was when Dilma Rousseff was in power. And I went to the UN, I went to the European Parliament. I made a name and shame campaign against industrial companies, French companies that were working on this project in the Amazon, like Alstom. And while I was giving a conference with Kasik Raoni, a British lady came to me. It was in Paris. It was in 2011, I think. And she spoke to me about a Scottish lawyer named Polly Higgins. And she said, someone is working on fixing this, I would say, this gap impunity that the corporates have with commercial law today, and where they can, work without taking into account human rights and environmental rights. And I met Polly in August 2012, and we decided to launch a European citizen initiative to recognize the crime of ecocide in a European directive. And that was really a citizen initiative. I was the first and the only French starting that in France, and there were 6 fellows from other countries, from UK, from Germany, from Austria, from Spain, Portugal, And for 1 year, we launched this European Citizen Initiative. And at that moment, I managed to raise the debate on, at least on ecocide, crimes against nature, in 2013. And then I was asked to write books on this. And so I made a research and a study of how to fix international law in order to protect again peace, because that was the main goal of the United Nations when it was created. But we can see today that commercial law, corporate law, is working in parallel of international law and fix the rules. And also I studied the story of the ecocide concept, because it's an old concept. It started even before the Vietnam War, but it was really the moment where it was publicly raised as an issue and said, okay, what happened in Vietnam with the Agent Orange and the US Army was an ecocide, because it destroyed the environment and it destroyed the lives of many generations to come, because still people are sick today because the environment is contaminated and polluted. And when it was discussed in the 90s, when we were drafting the Rome Statute, the ancestor of the Rome Statute, which is the statute founding the International Criminal Court, some countries wanted ecocide to be recognized. And at least crimes against the environment, the worst crimes against the environment. And at the end, only crimes against the environment in war times has been recognized. And due to the lobbying, I would say, of few countries, UK was part of it, France was part of it, the US, and if I remember well, in the Netherlands. France, I know why, because they wanted to keep their nuclear power energy as a, and that's dangerous, because it can have consequences on future generations too if there is an accident. So it stayed like that. And it took few lawyers. Polly was one of them, but there was a lot before, and there was some after her, lobbying to push forward the recognition of a fifth crime against peace and human security. And we are at a point today, because I continue this campaign within the End Ecocide on Earth movement, which is a citizen movement worldwide. I drafted the definition of ecocide in 2015 with 3 other lawyers, where I proposed to use the planetary boundaries concept, which is a theory which was proposed by the Stockholm Resilience Center, explaining that we should not cross the ecological limits of the planet unless we take the risk to fall in a inhospitable future and inhospitable planet. And so I proposed to use that tool to define the crime, because it's very complicated to define the crime. As far as when you say widespread, when you say long term, what does it mean? Few months, decades, generations? But we are not strong enough to be heard everywhere. Even if I gave the definition, even I remember to Ban Ki-moon at the COP21 when I met him, and to the French president, François Hollande, to propose that he carry the project during COP21 climate agreements in Paris. And he answered to me, I was at the Elysium at that time, answered to me, I cannot do both, It's very important, but I first have to get the climate agreements, and then I can think about ecocide. I said, no, but this is the same story, You need binding binding constraints if you want really the agreement to be respected. And we can see today that because we have a should instead of a shall in the text, it's not binding at all, even if there are a lot of climate case around the world trying to make it binding. And And then I worked with the Stop Ecocide Foundation when Polly passed away in 2019. I started to work with the Stop Ecocide Foundation. And last year, Greta Thunberg won a prize in Portugal, which was quite a big prize in, I would say, money, €1 million. And she decided to help the Stop Ecocide Foundation carry on the campaign. And at the same time, the Pope, Francis, took a stand on the ecocide also the same year. And also in General Assembly of State Parties at the ICC in December, 2 countries, Vanuatu and the Maldives, for the first time requested to recognize the crime of ecocide at the General Assembly. So there was kind of turning point at that moment. And I was then appointed to be part of a panel of 12 lawyers around the world from all the continents. And we worked together for 6 months, and we released a proposal of definition last June, on the 22nd of June, which got a real audience because more than 100 countries spoke about it. And Belgium is now the first country who officially decided to push forward the recognition of the crime. And took a stand also at the ICC General Assembly, and now is voting even to recognize the crime at the national level. So that's the story on ecocide. But ecocide is about the worst crime, which means that it has the same, I would say, strength.
Standing.
Yeah, that genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes. And how do we deal with, the fact that the system is still destroying nature, sometimes slowly, sometimes on small areas, but specifically because environmental law has been, imagined and drafted by Western countries, which are disconnected in law to nature. Western countries have really proposed a legal system to the world that put, of course, human being in the center and its dignity, which is very important, but forgot that we are interconnected to the well-being of the non-humans, of the ecosystems, of the species, and that we cannot protect our fundamental rights, especially today with the climate crisis and the ecological crisis and the 6 mass extinction we are already engaged in. We cannot protect fundamental rights of human beings, and especially for the next generation, which is the right to health, the right to life, of course, but the right to clean air, water, habitat, and because we never adopted this ecosystemic vision, and we don't have time to discuss about it, but for me it's really rooted in our religious culture and in our philosophical culture, where we believe for 1,000, 2,000 years that we were the masters. We are the son of gods, and everything which, and it's in the Bible, everything which flies, grow, swim, is at our service. And so I think we really need a paradigm shift to reconnect ourselves to nature, to understand that we are part of nature. And that's why at the same time, since 10 years, I was campaigning on the crime of ecocide. I felt that it was needed also to change the public law and recognize the rights of nature. And when I speak about the rights of nature, it's not the rights of nature against the rights of humans. It's first recognizing that human is one of the species on Earth, that he has rights, is depending on the well-being of other species around the world, and is depending on the well-being of the Earth system in itself and all the subsystems that make the Earth system sustaining life, which is the biosphere, the hydrosphere, the cryosphere, the lithosphere. And these systems, and that's how we define now the crime of ecocide. It's a crime against the Earth system functionings, which is a shift also even the way we define the crime of ecocide. We see that it's really a crime against life, against nature in itself. In the proposal we made in June, the idea is really to understand that you have to imagine like concentric cycles. At the moment, we have the human rights, the corporate rights, and sometimes in some countries, nature rights, which is not really, but there are like 2-3 spheres. What we need today is recognizing the rights of the Earth system, so the rights of nature, which protect the human rights, and then commercial law should be at the service of the other two levels. And of course, it doesn't please the people who are making profit on the planet and on the people. So it's tricky, but there is a kind of, as for the crime of ecocide, I feel that there is a kind of consciousness rising around that, because even if it started in the US and South America, in the US in 2006, the first city who recognized the crime of ecocide was in the US, in Pennsylvania. It's in Tamaca. And then Ecuador recognized the crime, the rights of nature in its constitution in 2008, and then Bolivia the next year. We can see today that through different means, which is political choices, citizen requests, but also court cases, and this is very interesting. The judges around the world are advancing the rights of nature. It happened in India, it happened in Colombia, and they are the ones who, facing a problem, say, okay, we have to give a legal personhood to the Amazon forest, or we have to give a legal personhood to rivers, or to mountains, or to glaciers. And in Bangladesh, for example, the court decided that it will grant a legal personhood to all rivers in Bangladesh, which are at least 450, and during the rainy season, 700. So there are different ways to advance that and to fit in the local culture, the local philosophy also. And it's also rising in Europe, and this is very inspiring because, of course, we are the last continent. Uganda has a law in Africa now on the rights of nature, and there are a lot of regulations around many countries in Africa about sacred sites that they call that they want to protect. We have also rights of nature now in New Zealand, in Australia, and as I said, in Asia. And Europe is the last continent because, of course, for me, the gap in the law came from the one who framed the law, and we are those ones, the colonizers, clearly. But it's really inspiring, and that's why I'm today with you in North Island, because I wanted to meet, the people who are advancing the rights of nature, and I'm preparing an exhibition in France to show in Europe everywhere where it's popping, and the tracks that or the tricks, I will say even, that people use to advance the rights of nature, and there are plenty of experiences popping everywhere. And in France, it's really in the debate. It's even now in the programs of few candidates at the presidential election that we will have in 6 months. That was the case 5 years ago at the last election with the crime of ecocide. There were 5 parties speaking about it. So for me, it was kind of, okay, the discussion is there. And now it's the rights of nature. And so I'm very, enthusiastic. I know that, it's not, it will take a lot of time. But what is important to me is really that when we start to think about, is it possible like Christopher Stone was saying in 72, that trees could, stand in court. Is it possible that a river can stand in court or can be part of the discussion at the public policy level, like in governance work in a council, in a municipality, at the national level? Then people start to reconnect to their inner nature, which is being part of nature. And this is the main point, I would say, that makes me keep on, because I can see the people are realizing that, and also are realizing that recognizing the rights of nature is also protecting social justice, climate justice, environmental justice, and that everything is linked, intertwined, and that we should not. We should think as if it has to be dealt separately. We really have today, and it's Glasgow has started, and this is, I would say, the main message today with the COP26 is we cannot separate climate crisis to the biodiversity crisis, and we cannot separate those two to the social crisis.
That's great. Thank you very much. I know that you've spent time with colleagues in Derry and Donegal who are working on these issues, and they have managed to get Derry and Strabane Council to adopt a programme of work and a possible commitment to a declaration. From your conversations, I think you've met some of the council officers and the activists. Could you comment just on the significance of that and maybe some of the steps that they could take now, maybe drawing on other European examples, what steps they might take to really embed this conversation and begin to codify a commitment to the rights of nature?
Yeah, I'm really impressed, because it's I met a lot of activists, and like Maeve O'Neill, who is an activist, but at the same time was in the council, and she managed to get the vote with, if I understood well, a lot of parties represented within the council itself. So it crossed the boundaries of ideologies and parties, which I think she did really a great job on that. Of course, when I met the legal advisor, he was really interested in the concept, but trying to see if it can fit in, I would say, the regulations, that how democracy has to be implemented, or how decision could be implemented. So we had a great discussion on this, because just before coming, I met Lyon mayor. Lyon is the second biggest city in France, and the mayor of Lyon decided to, as in Derry, to sign an appeal to grant legal personhood to the Rhône River. The Rhône River is a huge river, 700 kilometers, from a glacier in the Alps in Switzerland to Camargue, the delta, which leads to the Mediterranean Sea. So it's even a transboundary river. And I had a kind of discussion of how to implement that, and I got the same one in Derry. And what I think is really wise in the way the motion was voted in Derry and Strabane is the fact that the elected members didn't, decided from the top that, okay, we will recognize the rights of nature. They propose, as you said, a roadmap where they can involve the citizens in the process of defining the rights. And this is a key. When the proposition comes from politicians, it's really important to put the citizen on board. And we had a great experience in France with the Citizen Climate Convention that was set up to propose solutions to tackle climate change and to reduce our CO2 emissions Macron organized this climate convention because he was in front of a wall with the Gilets jaunes strike, with the climate justice strikes, and the march from the youth. And so he realized that he needed the citizen, to legitimate his choices. I must say that he betrayed them at the end. But the process in itself was really interesting because 150 citizens were chosen randomly from all regions in France, and you can adopt this same strategy at the district level from all social classes, all genders, all ages. So there were like young people, like 16, 17, and retired people. There were workers, but also entrepreneurs, teachers. And most of them were not very informed about the consequences of climate change and the risk, and were not very concerned about the problem. But during 9 months, the government paid in order to organize every weekend conferences, debates, informations given to those 150 citizens. I was auditioned by the convention, and I was in a contradictory debate with another lawyer who's not at all, defending the same ideas, and they had to make their own judgments and their own proposals. And the result after 9 months was just stunning, because they were really experts, and they became really convinced, and a lot of them even started then an organization, the 150, they call it. And now they are activists, and some came into politics. And they adopted very radical solutions that they would not have adopted if they were just, asked through a petition or through a political program what they think about rights of nature, about changing the constitution. They went much further than what the government was expecting from them. And they adopted an ecosystemic perspective. So they said, we cannot just propose you how to reduce CO2 emission. This is not enough. We have also to tackle the problem of, loss of biodiversity, nitrogen, all the planetary boundaries. And they voted in favor of the crime of ecocide. They proposed that. They voted in favor at 99.3%. That was the motion which was the most supported by the citizens. And I was really impressed. And I think we have to be inspired by this, because if politicians are sincere in their wish to advance that, they need to ask citizens to come on board, and they need to let them be trained and informed in order that when they take the decision, they really are, empowered to do it. And the legal advisor that I met in Derry and Strabane told me that, I don't know exactly the whole system, but there are 4 pillars that have to be respected when implementing a regulation at the local level. And one of these pillars is participative democracy, and that they are not using it a lot, but that might be the gate entry to advance the process of involving the population within the process of defining the rights of nature at the district level. That's my advice.
Fantastic. Rachel, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I wanted to think a little bit about secondary rights for nature, and particularly rights of remedy for nature. So I was very struck recently over the last couple of years to see the Colombia's transitional justice process deem the territories of Indigenous communities and a Black community as victims in their own right, and this recognition of these relationships between human victims and the environments in which they live. And I think what struck me in particular is that they're essentially saying a territory has a right to truth, to justice, to reparation. And I was interested in your thoughts on that. And particularly, is that the direction that we need to see with ecocide? You mentioned Christopher Stone. Should trees have standing at the ICC? Should we see them as victim participants with rights of reparation?
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning the case of Colombia, because I think it's really the place where a new concept emerged, especially with the Atrato River case, where the Atrato River was recognized as a living entity and a legal personhood. But what decided the Constitutional Court at that time was, of course, you need to have a voice for the river. They decided to nominate 14 guardians of people living alongside the bank of the river, and in the Choco, which is one of the places also where it's still dangerous, and still the peace process is, at stake, I would say. And also there are a lot of extractivism there. They said, okay, the indigenous people and the Afro descendants, people who are living on the river, will be guardians and will speak on behalf of the river in court. And they didn't they didn't stop there, because that's the way usually it happens in the countries where the rights of nature are recognized. It could be the citizens, it could be the public ministry, like in Ecuador. It could be NGOs, it could be local people living in the ecosystems. What he said is, it's more than recognizing the rights of nature and recognizing the right of those people to live in a healthy environment. He said, we are speaking there about biocultural rights. And this is very interesting, because the court joined the rights for a healthy environment, and the rights to live according to their ancestral culture, to the rights of nature to exist, thrive, regenerate, and be not polluted. And 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 this is something, it's tricky, when you speak about biocultural rights, because I discuss that a lot with in dairy, because the Irish culture is very strong. I'm Celtic myself. I'm from Brittany. I'm originally from Brittany, so I know that, and I can feel it. When I met the people in Derry, we went every day somewhere, like in the Ness Woods, on the Foyle River, in the very tiny ancient forest that is still there, on the coast at Malin Head, and I can see the ancestral roots and the identity, which is really linked to the territory and to the place. And in a place like that, biocultural rights is for me, has a meaning. But of course, if you start to speak it this way, with the story you have, it might be sometimes difficult. But it's very interesting also to see that in Europe, where the rights of nature are emerging, are places where cultural identity is very strong. In France, it happened first where? In Corsica. And for the people I met in Corsica, I was there end of June, beginning of July. The citizens were fighting against a dump.
Yes, a waste site.
A waste site.
Yeah.
Nearby the river, the Tavignano River, and they are fighting since years in court and so on. And they decided in July to write a Rights of Nature Charter for the Tavignano River, and then they asked the politicians to sign it and to come into the battle through the rights of the river. But when you discuss with them, it's really also because it's the island, it's Corsica, it's their home. And they don't see their home as France, they see their home as Corsica. And when you speak about biocultural rights with them, it's obvious. It happened with the Sami people in Sweden. The parliament of the Sami people, who are indigenous, the last indigenous people really recognized, I would say, by the United Nations, in Europe, in the boreal forest, they signed the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, which was proposed in 2010 in Cochabamba in Bolivia. And they say we will stand for the rights of nature. So that's, I just let it on the table. But that's something which, can be interested, but you have to adjust it to the context and to see if it will not raise, an opposition just on semantic. I think it's just important to say that you want to protect the land where you live, and you are related to this land. Maybe not mentioning all of the time that it's because it's an ancestral land.
Yeah, pretty good. I know that you're on your way to the Rights of Nature Tribunal in Glasgow. Is that correct?
Yeah, it will be hybrid, and I was already a judge at the last tribunal, which was at the IUCN Congress in Marseille in September. So I let the seat to others because.
Nice.
But yes, we organize. I'm an executive member of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. It's a federation of individuals and organizations around the world campaigning for the rights of nature and advising countries and cities and citizens on this. Our headquarters are in Quito, in Ecuador, where the rights of nature are constitutionally recognized. And since 2013, we organize international tribunals, but also local ones, according to problems that appears in Australia, in Chiquitina, in Bolivia, and the one which will take place in Glasgow is the 5th international one. The last one was in Bonn, and the one before we organized in Paris during COP21. This one was really huge. And the idea is, I would say, it's kind of pedagogy. It's showing when you take a human rights and indigenous rights and nature rights perspective in court, and you propose real cases with real experts, with real witnesses, what would be the judgment at the end? And in Glasgow, we focused on two main issues: the Amazon forest and climate change. But we also organized last year to launch really the European Hub on the Rights of Nature that we started, and I proposed to our fellows here in North Island to join the alliance. We organized the European Tribunal on the Rights of Nature, and specifically on the rights of aquatic ecosystems in Europe. So that was mainly rivers, sea, lake, everywhere in Europe, and we did this tribunal during the IUCN Congress. That was very interesting, and it's very pedagogic because it really shows to the people how it could work, and it raised the issue because we always organize those tribunals when there is a big, event, a big COP, in order to show, to be out of the box and to show how it could work if we adopt this ecocentric perspective.
I'm interested in the sort of long-term implications of both the ecocide and rights of nature debate, because, as you say, it has massive social and economic implications. It's really unwinding, even at an ontological, but also from the perspective of property. It begins to correct a deep bias in the system, which is driven by the dominant economic narrative, capitalism. Could you say a little bit more about the long-term implications, the deep implications of this conversation for the social and economic paradigm that is really driving and has been responsible for stripping out a lot of the effectiveness of human rights as well as our environmental laws. So,
Yeah, that's a debate we had when we proposed a constitutional amendment in France to have a more ecological and social justice constitution, and that was debated in the assembly, and it was also debated at the Citizen Convention on Climate. And of course, the constitutional lawyers always say, but how can we fit the rights of nature and individual freedom and property rights? And that was so interesting because I explained that you can have even both in the law or even in the constitution. And it's the same when I was speaking about inviting the voice of an ecosystem at the table of a negotiation when you have to decide about a project that you have to do for your town. It's exactly the same perspective. Is if they have the same weight, then there is a consensus to find, and there is a discussion between, and I would say a discussion which will be driven by a long-term perspective instead of a short-term one. And so you can have the river speaking for his intrinsic value and his own interest. You will have the corporate, you will have maybe, the civil workers saying we don't want to lose our jobs. You have the farmers, you have everyone around the table. And then it really depends the way you deal with the discussion, saying, okay, do we look at the short-term profit or the short-term interest of some part of the people? Do we look at the long-term? And there is a lawyer who is working on ecocide and rights of nature in the Netherlands, Jan van de Venis, he was the ombudsman for future generation in the Netherlands. He was appointed for that. And when he works with the people, and I think it's really an interesting way to work, he makes the exercise saying, okay, tell us your interest at the moment according to the issue, the problem you have to deal with. And usually the people, they look at their own interest and on the very short term. And then he said, okay, think about your ancestors 7 generations back, where they were, how they were living, what they wanted for their children, grandchildren. And now think about the result of your choice in 7 generations. And he's doing this exercise with politicians, with activists, with corporates or CEOs, and it changed totally the way they think. And sometimes they really decide for the greater good, even if they have to lose something. And what was very interesting when I had this debate in France, I was explaining that, and there was a constitutional lawyer, and he was a state councillor, and she was saying, "Oh, but you understand that then it means that we have to decrease these constitutional rights to property rights, to individual freedom, which is, the essence of our democracy and our republic." But it's possible. And I said, yes, it's possible, because law is changing all the time. Law is for me, the mirror of where we are in our values, where we are in our moral, parameters. And today, no one will go reverse on women's rights, on the abolition of slavery. It means that law can change. Yes, okay. And 10 days later, the French Constitutional Court was dealing with a case with the Monsanto, Syngenta, all the big, pharma corporates, saying that they have the right to sell their pesticides, and the court said, we have a charter on biodiversity which has a constitutional value, and the interest of nature in this case is bigger than your profits. And I say, hey. So again, it's a court. But it's really important because it's a case law. It made a jurisprudence. And so I'm confident that we can find ways. It doesn't mean that nature will win all the time. If you look at Ecuador, you had maybe 50 trials since 2008. 2/3 were won in favor of the ecosystems, and projects were stopped or avoided, because I think that's the main value of the rights of nature, is that it has a preventive effect, which doesn't have enough, I think, environmental laws at the moment, which is more about how to restore it, how to compensate, and how to punish when the crime has been, or the disaster has already arrived. And like in France, we have the ecological prejudice, which is a kind of, ecocentric perspective, because nature today has its intrinsic value, but you can go to court only when the disaster has happened. And sometimes disaster is so huge that you cannot expect biodiversity to be restored. So the preventive approach is very interesting. And when you have to deliberate on a industrial project, everyone, around the table will have a word to say, and you don't know who will win at the end. And I don't know. I don't say that sometimes it's important to look at social justice, and you might have to wait because it will have too much impact, because the transition methods are not implemented already, or trainings for the people to shift from, I don't know, a coal mine to a wind power industry. But it's worth it to try. And I think it's worth it. And I missed my point, but
Well, maybe I can ask a kind of follow-up question there, building on what Peter was asking about how we balance, these emerging rights with more traditional rights to property. And I was thinking on the international level about the right to development. And is there a risk with the rights of nature, but I'm thinking also about ecocide here, of it becoming a case of the global north kind of judging the development aspirations of the global south? So how do we weigh up this kind of global inequality and the rights of states that have been held back by the very colonialism that you mentioned at the start?
we cannot look at the rights of nature concept out of the system and out of the decision that are discussed today, for example, in Glasgow. We have a responsibility in climate change and the destruction of nature as the most biggest polluters. And and that's not, that's important to understand that, for example, the first countries who requested to recognize the crime of ecocide were islands, Vanuatu and the Maldives, Pacific Islands, and Indian Ocean Islands, because they are, of course, in front of but also because they are seeking for climate justice for them. And so they consider that recognizing the crime of ecocide will be a wonderful tool for them to oblige the polluters to comply to their engagement. And don't forget that the engagement is not only to reduce the CO2 emission, but it's to help the South with 100,000 billions per year, to help them to adapt and to be more resilient, and then to shift from maybe the energies they can use, like coal plants and so on, to to more sustainable energies. So you cannot separate the idea of implementing the rights of nature or the crime of ecocide without keeping the promise that we will help the South and that we will do the main efforts, which was in the climate agreement deal, that you have to recognize a shared responsibility, but differentiated. How do you say?
Yeah, shared but differentiated responsibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this has to be kept. This idea has to be kept, absolutely.
Can we think about the ICC in that context? Because the ICC, as you know, gets subjected to contested critiques that it's politically biased, that it's racially biased, and certainly, even if that's not true, it has not yet managed to prosecute anyone from the global north. Is there a risk that it becomes a tool for holding back environmental harms that happen in the global south, but it doesn't really have a lot of teeth for some of the main perpetrators?
I fully agree with you that if the crime of ecocide is recognized by the ICC, it will have mainly a symbolic effect and a moral effect, that a line cannot be crossed anymore. In terms of effectiveness, ICC has very few means, and also due to the fact that the richest members are not paying their share. That's very clear. So we are also responsible for that. And I know that African countries are very cautious, because at the moment it was mainly African leaders who were trialed. And so I discussed with some African activists and politicians, and I said, we are in favor of the crime of ecocide, but if it has to, to be us again, to be on the stage, no. I mean, and this, I fully understand the concern. But if the crime is recognized at the ICC level, all the countries who have ratified the statute will have to recognize the crime of ecocide at the national level. And also it will give a universal jurisdiction and a universal competences to the national judges to trial ecocide in their own country, but also outside. And this, at least, is a very strong tool. The problem today we have to deal with the Stop Ecocide Foundation is that some countries want to take the leadership. And for example, France, the majority and the government refused the proposal of law that we proposed as definition of the crime of ecocide. But to please everyone, put in the last law that was voted last summer, which is a law on climate and resilience, the recognition of an offense of ecocide. And at the same time, Macron tells everyone around the world that he will push forward the recognition of the crime of ecocide at the ICC. And he said, this is so hypocrite, and also it's more than hypocrite. It's it's painful, because it's how do you say? It doesn't help the cause. And I told the government, I say, if you recognize only an offense of ecocide, it means that you can recognize an offense of genocide, an offense of, against humanity, and you don't. Or you don't understand what is an ecocide. We are not speaking about environmental criminality. We are speaking about a worse crime, which is also a very rare case. So that's why I'm saying it draws a moral line, which is very important. But if you recognize it at the national level, then you have to follow the same idea. And recognizing an offense is just, okay, you can recognize an offense, but you understand the difference, because in French, we use the word crime only for the criminal law.
Yeah. And then regulatory offences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's not. That's why it's tricky to explain in English, because it really doesn't have the same level and the same power. But many countries start really to think about recognizing a crime of ecocide at the national level, and this can be powerful.
One of the things that you've mentioned in your talk and a couple of times has been the role of Indigenous peoples around the world in pushing for these movements. How do we make sure that we fully engage those people's agency and advocacy in this movement? And how do we avoid rights of nature becoming another kind of colonial tool where we, implement our rights of nature into dominant structures that still don't recognize their custodianship or their collective rights?
So that's why I'm part of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, because we have in the board a lot of indigenous leaders, and they are really the one we listen the most. And they also proposed, as I explained, we started to have some regional hubs, thematic hubs, and there is also an indigenous hub in the Global Alliance that feeds with their recommendation all the others, and they're always there at the tribunals, each campaign that we make, and when we give advice to countries, to citizens, it's always according to what was decided as the roadmap or the words that we should use with them, like Casey Camp Orinek, she's a Ponca, like Tom Gotus, who is the executive chair of the Indigenous Environmental Network, like Patricia Galinga, like, and for me, it's really essential. But I just want, if I can, I don't know if we have time, but I want to tell you something about the rights of nature and indigenous people. A lot of people think that rights of nature concept came from the indigenous people, and that's why it's so strange and so different from our culture. But that's not true. That's not true. The indigenous people, and I discussed even with Casey, who passed a law in our nation, the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma, only in 2016 on the rights of nature. And she explained to me, she said, for us, it was a bit strange, to recognize the rights of nature. And in fact, it started in the US, as I explained, but it was a consensus when they drafted the constitution in Ecuador with the indigenous people, with the academics, which were descendant of the colonizers, even if they were working with indigenous people, said, we don't understand. I mean, because nature is there. Nature was there before we arrived. So the right of nature to exist is just non-negotiable. It's, it's more than inalienable rights. It's, she was there. We are part of her, and we have to learn to manage what is around us. And so it's not even customary law, or it took ways in customary law in the way the people used to share the resources with the animals, with the plants in the same territory, and so it became rules, traditional rules, but they didn't need a name for that. And they started to understand the interest to recognize the rights of nature when they understood that it could provoke a paradigm shift, and it could make a bridge between their customary law and Western law, and that they could use it to stand in court and stop the projects which were threatening their territories, their nations, like pipelines, like fracking industries, like extractivism, like the Alberta tar sands for the people who live around. And at that moment, they said, okay, that can be a tool to fight the colonizers. But it arrived quite late. And if you look at the thinkers of the rights of nature movement, okay, there was Christopher Stone, but there was Thomas Berry. And Thomas Berry is a white guy. And Arnes with the deep ecology concept. It's from Norway. So I always laugh, when people say, hey, this is indigenous and it's folklore and we don't understand. No, it's just a new way to think the law and to think our relationship with the environment that we should not call, I think, anymore environment. Because when you say environment, you speak about something which surrounds you. You are in the center of it and you are not part of it. So that's why I like the word nature, and I'm not ashamed to speak about nature or life, if you want, or the Earth system. You can use the word you want, but
I think you're right. The framing or the continued framing of this debate as an indigenous discourse is a way to distance
and to avoid.
Avoid and maybe deprive it of some of the legitimacy that it's now beginning to gather. We have a question from a friend online. So the question is, hi Valerie, in terms of biocultural rights, what can we learn from the relationship between the rights of nature and nomadic peoples? So he cite the example of Australian Aboriginal peoples and those of the North American continent. Do you see this to be linked with the prospect of mass climate migration from nomadic peoples in the global south to the global north as a result of climate change?
So there are for me two questions in one. The first one, and I think we have to speak up to tonight if I want to. But my book was translated in English by Indian translators, so it's not perfect, but you can find it. Rights for Planet Earth with a foreword of Vandana Shiva. The whole concept of the rights of nature, of planetary boundaries, and even of the ideas of recognizing a legal status to the natural commons raise the issue not only on property rights, but also on national sovereignty and boundaries. And so it's like, vertiginous, but that's what I did in my book. I tried to imagine how it could really shake this, which, we look at it as granted. But when you're on the moon and you watch at the Earth, it's one planet, it's one home, human beings in one species on it, and the whole system of nationalism, and also one of the reasons that international law failed and the UN system failed is because they kept as a pivot value the national sovereignty. That's why all the agreements are not really binding. That's why Trump can go out of the Paris Agreement when he did it. And so we are in a system where instead of cultivating for me two other levels of humanism, which is universal humanism, considering humanity as one, and nature as one, and humanity part of this nature, and also recognizing the rights of local people, local territories to their own sovereignty or their own even food sovereignty, for example, and their own rights to draw some laws. What happened in the US with the fact that the cities can pass laws is that the people decided to recognize the rights of local communities and natural communities at the same time. So they recognize their own rights as people to defend their land and the rights of the ecosystems in which they live. And this is very interesting. And I think that if we want to cultivate solidarity and fraternity with the migrating crisis, which is happening and will happen very fast, we are speaking about 250 million of people in 10 years. We are speaking about 2 billion of human beings who will be displaced up to the end of the century or even before 2080. So we can't imagine even what does it mean. So what shall we do? We vote for populist, nationalist leaders and we build real walls like Poland is doing in Białowieża forest and the Adrian Wall again everywhere? Or we open, to this universal vision of saying we are one, we have a common responsibility of what's going on, and we find solutions together because we'll have to deal with it. And that's why I'm still, carrying this campaign because the time is very short. The economical collapse or the economical crisis, I believe, is going to happen quite fast at the same time that the ecological collapse. And if we don't do this paradigm shift in our vision, in our values, in our law, then it's going to be bored and chaotic. And we are really suing the branch where we sit, and the human species is really at stake at the moment. So if you don't want to do it for nature, do it at least for your own species. Because if at the end you will have 100,000 people living very comfortably under a dome or in space, because we found fantastic technologies to escape from the climate or the ecological crisis, it will be a very, very small percentage of people who will benefit of that. The other ones will be just, massive refugee camp everywhere. And those ones who will live in comfort on a dead planet are the ones who are making profit today on people and the planet.
Amen. Yeah. I'm loath to mention Matt Damon in such a cultured and intelligent conversation, but I started to watch Elysium the other day and I had to turn it off because it was too realistic. I don't want to have to
It's exactly the
this.
way, Elysium was really, and there was a French writer also who wrote a book which is very similar. But it's really the way I think the world can turn to if we are not careful enough.
There's another question from an audience member, and I can see it, so I can read it out if you like. So it says, hello, Valerie. I have a question regarding the protection of the rights of nature in courts. If more stringent laws on the rights of nature were to be passed, especially in Western countries, who do you think should be responsible for representing the rights of nature in the courts and preparing the legal arguments?
It's a tricky question. I think it really depends on the countries and the way it works. Because when we speak about the rights of nature, it seems that we speak about something very global. But the rights of nature concept should be, for example, embedded in the Constitution as a principle. But then who is going to court is a specific ecosystem, a specific species. If you speak about a specific ecosystems, it seems to me that the way Ecuador deal with it is a good way. Means that the people who live locally there could go to court to represent the interest of the ecosystem. And if you have an independent justice, then you can expect also even the public ministry or the prosecutor to speak on behalf of the ecosystems if the constitution allows him to do it. And of course, I would say environmental NGOs, but not only. If we stick on the system we have in France, we cannot do, for example, class actions. That's why I'm saying it really depends on the country. We cannot do class actions. So when we made our climate case against the state that we won, we were 4 NGOs, and then we asked the citizen to sign a petition online and we got 2,000,000.3 signatures in a month, but they were not part of the trial. So that's why I think citizens have to be more involved in the process. But in France, I would not say that the prosecutor should be involved, because our justice is not anymore independent, since it was decided that there will be a Ministry of Justice, and the Ministry of Justice will be the head of the system, the legal system. I'm sorry to say it, but the separation of powers in France is slipping away. So citizens and especially, we can say any citizens, because we all belong to one main ecosystems. But if we decide to recognize biocultural rights, then it should be the citizens who live in the place.
Just to end, Valérie, I must say, you've recalled a very pleasant memory of Polly Higgins visiting the school and holding a number of discussions with our students. So I think we still have some of those recordings available. I wonder if you might end by offering a few words to our student body, especially those who are thinking about their careers, maybe want to do something with their energy and their careers and their legal training in a way that will complement and expand on some of the ideas that you've rehearsed today. What would you say to the students who are thinking about a career and who maybe are resonating with some of the interests and the analysis that you've offered today?
Yeah. I don't know if it happened in UK, but in France, since the climate march started, I've been approached by a lot of students' organizations from big schools which are known as liberal and also left-handed, but also schools that train the people to be the CEOs of tomorrow. And like business school, or the administration, the high administration school, or Sciences Po, which is science politics, which is very famous around the world. And what did the students is that they ally and they made some kind of organization, and they published tribunes, articles in Le Monde, in the main media, like 50,000 some sign. I remember once from business school saying, we will not work for the polluters. We will not apply to any jobs. And then within their own organization, they push their own school to disinvest from fossil fuels, and it worked. And so it's a kind of, okay, we agree to study, we agree to be part of of the story, but we commit ourselves not to feed the beast. And it shaked a lot the corporate unions, and because whoa, we try to format them, because some schools are really, when they are private, they really format your mind, and it's not working anymore. I would say that. And then, of course, they can, like Maeve O'Neill, she's 33 years old. She's an activist since she's a child. Her parents were activists, if I met them, and they were really inspiring. And I think you can manage to work, to be an activist, to enter into politics, and to stay connected all at the same time, to nature and civil rights movements, and you can make a change. You can make a difference by pushing forward this. And in France, I will give you another example. We started in 2015 an organization on climate justice. And today there are 100 young lawyers who are volunteering in the NGO. And we are the one who put on trial the state, and we just won. And we prepared the case for 2.5 years. And all those young lawyers, they were just still studying or making, their masters, their thesis, or just finishing, and some just passed the bar, but they were volunteering for us. And I'm the oldest in the NGO. They are all between 20 and 35, I would say, even at the board. And then we went to Oxfam, to Greenpeace, and we said, okay, please join us in the climate case against the state. Said, okay, let's go. And they put, some help, some money for the campaign, and the YouTubers came on board and they made a video, and that's how we got 1 million signature in 3 days, 2.3 in a month. And at the end, the court gave us reason that the government is not complying to the objective he fixed, and has and it has now just 1 year to up to December 2022 to prove that they will really decrease the emissions. And if they don't do it, then there will be injunction and fines and so on. So just to show that the young people can do amazing thing, and according to their own competence. And we are in the School of Law, and if you want any contact with our young lawyers who are working on climate justice and environmental justice, and on the crime of ecocide too, and on rights of nature too, because that's the mandate of the name of the NGO is Notre Affaire à tous, our affair to all, or affaire. And I can connect students with students, and they can, learn from each other about the experiences.
Valérie Cabanes, thank you very much for all your work. It's been quite an inspiration, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.